Good morning, everyone. With regards to my last video and Bill O'Reilly's treatment of a shooting in Virginia of a young reporter and her cameraman, I wanted to clarify a couple of things because I don't want to be guilty of something that Bill O'Reilly himself was guilty of, and that is assessing morality to a group rather than individual people. And so I want to clarify a couple of things in that regard. Obviously, I think in this case, mental illness is the issue, not necessarily morality. And I think if Bill O'Reilly ever acknowledges the fact that this guy in fact was spiritual, because that was sort of his assessment, was there's a decline in spirituality. Of course, spirituality with regards to a deity, not the sort of overall more amorphous kind of idea of spirituality, but spirituality with regards to a deity contributes to an overall nihilism and a culture of me, as he calls it. And that's what leads to some of these acts. And he was challenging a young psychotherapist to come up with any instance of a mass shooting recently that involved a person that was that had a spiritual foundation. And oops, this guy happened to be a Jehovah's Witness, and actually, apparently, in his manifesto, remarked that Jehovah had instructed him to carry out his plans. And I suspect if Bill O'Reilly ever actually acknowledges this fact, that this guy actually had the spirituality, he will revert back to the safety of the mental illness argument, which is the argument that the psychotherapist was trying to make all along. And I don't want to be guilty of painting Christians with that same brush and the uncharitable nature in which Bill O'Reilly painted unbelievers, because I believe that morality is an individual thing. So I mentioned in my video that the most moral people that I know are unbelievers, and that's possibly true, but that's not to say that I think Christian people are immoral simply because of their beliefs. And I mentioned that I don't think it's all that virtuous, I guess, to do the moral thing because of a promise of reward or the threat of an eternal punishment. And it was actually a comment on my video, which I think was well thought out, which basically said, you know, this is not the only reason that Christians are moral, and it's not the greatest argument, and I actually agree with that. I think to the degree that there are people who would only do the moral thing because of a promise of some wonderful gift or the threat of something eternally tormenting, is to the same degree that that person might say something like, if I were an atheist, if I didn't have these moral pronouncements, etc., I would be a really bad actor. You know, we know of a couple of very famous theists who have said that they would be immediately engaged in all kinds of criminal behavior were it not for the restraints placed on them by Scripture. And I think those people equally might, unfortunately, be the same people who would then, if they heard a voice in their head, go and carry out those terrible acts, believing that Jehovah or Yahweh or whoever had instructed them directly, personally, to do those things. However, having said all of that, I don't believe that that is the majority of Christians or any other religious group. In fact, I think probably, being charitable, if Bill O'Reilly himself received what he believed was a personal instruction from Yahweh to go and commit some sort of murder, he might actually seek a psychotherapist. Maybe not the one that was on his show, but he might actually, seek therapy rather than conduct the act itself. So I wasn't trying to make that connection. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned, I view morality to be an individual issue rather than a group issue, that this group happens to be moral, this group happens to be immoral, that sort of thing. And I think really when it comes down to it, I think morality probably has more to do with just childhood upbringing and the morality of your surroundings than it does anything else, mental illness notwithstanding. I mean, of course, obviously, all bets are off if someone's got clanging things happening upstairs. And I've been through this with my own father. Mental illness changes the game. My dad was pretty normal, if somewhat eccentric person for the first 50-some years of his life, and then things changed, right? And so I have a personal experience watching that take place. But when it comes to morality, I look at myself and I'm eerily similar in the way I view the world and the way I treat other human beings to the way I observed my parents as I was growing up. And gee, imagine that, right? And I think that's the same with most people. I think that most Christians are moral for the sake of morality itself. And while they may believe in the scripture and they believe that they are beholden to this higher power and that there is a threat of eternal damnation and the promise of eternal wonderfulness, that's not the reason that they do the good thing. It's funny because I've struggled with this idea of what to consider myself in terms of social justice causes. And I've struggled with trying to find a definition for egalitarianism because it doesn't really fit. Everything can't be equal. Right? So I've come up with this idea of equality of opportunity. And even that's very clunky and not very precise. And I was listening to a Diana Davidson video recently, and she coined the term, or just basically said that she is an individualist. And the light bulb just went on. That's what I've been my whole life anyway, is I've been an individualist. When it comes to social justice causes, I'm an individualist, and egalitarianism fits into that framework as best it can. In other words, a person born without arms and legs, they can't be equal, ever, save for, scientific prosthetics or something down the road, maybe. A man, is limited in his ability to bear children. Again, maybe save for something down the road, some wonderful invention that allows that to happen. I don't know. But there are limitations that we have. And so egalitarianism in sort of a pure sense, and I don't believe in equality of outcome, of course. So freedom of expression, freedom of association, and not having arbitrary constraints placed on a person based on arbitrary metrics such as race and gender and socioeconomic status and religious beliefs and political affiliations and all that, I think I agree with. But really, essentially, it comes down to the individual. What are an individual's merits? And they can have that equal access to things within the framework of their own individual merits. And individualism really fits, I think, into this concept of morality. We're all individuals, and it doesn't necessarily dictate what kind of a person you're going to be morally, your religious belief or your irreligious belief. And I think Bill O'Reilly obviously did a big disservice to atheists and hell, even nihilists for that matter, in his address about spirituality and mass killings. I think he did a big disservice to the issue of mental illness as well. Obviously, I think it's important that we try to find out what the root cause is that underpins things like mass shootings and mental illness itself, if that were at all possible. But I didn't want to paint the picture that I think that all Christians are only motivated to do the virtuous thing by promises of an eternal reward or threats of an eternal punishment. And that really all that separates a guy like this who claims to have been acting under the directive of Jehovah and someone like Bill O'Reilly is the mental illness itself. And I only wish that Bill O'Reilly and people like him would extend the same consideration and respect to people who don't share in their spiritual beliefs. Thanks for watching.